I think now we can start our webinar. So welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today from, I guess, around the world. So we are here today to help you and share with you some ideas about how to apply to grad school, to answer all the questions you might have. So my name is Marta Doglio. I'm a first-year PhD student at the Joukowsky Institute at Brown. I'm an archaeologist working mostly in Southwest Asia. I'm currently involved in two projects, one in southern Turkey and another one in northern Mesopotamia, northern Iraq. And my research focuses mostly on material culture, specifically pottery production and chaîne opératoire. And also my colleague Talia today is joining me.
Hi, sorry people are moving chairs above me. I hope there's not too much interference. But my name is Talia Smith. I'm also a first-year PhD student here at the Joukowsky, and I work primarily in France, in Roman Gaul, although I also have fieldwork in Italy, in central and southern Italy, and I'm interested in religious practice, and I did my master's in France abroad. So any questions about the kind of transition, I'm happy to answer this as well.
Yeah, so now I'm going to ask the faculty to introduce themselves, and I'm going to start with Professor Andrew Scherer, the director of the Institute.
Yeah, hi, I'm Andrew Scherer, the director of the Joukowsky Institute. I'm also faculty in the Department of Anthropology. I'm an archaeologist and bioarchaeologist of the ancient Maya, and I do sort of field work in both Mexico and Guatemala.
Okay, then Professor Laurel Bestock is next.
Hi, I'm Laurel Bestock. I'm a professor in the Joukowsky Institute for Archaeology in the Ancient World and also in the Egyptology department. And I am an archaeologist of the Nile Valley with deep experience both in Egypt itself and in Sudan. I am a field archaeologist, very interested in monumentality and kingship. I'm also an art historian and have worked on images of violence in particular.
Thank you. And then we have Professor Felipe Rojas with us.
Yeah, I'm Felipe Rojas. I'm also affiliated both with the Joukowsky Institute and with the Department of Egyptology and Assyriology. I work primarily in Turkey and in Jordan, mostly on Greek and Roman sites. And I currently have ongoing projects in the city of Petra in Jordan and in various places in Turkey.
All right. So now, before we get into it, I just want to go over the layout we've set up for this webinar. So we're going to divide it kind of into three parts. The first part, we're going to talk about general PhD life questions. And then next, we're going to move on to application questions. And then the third part, we'll be talking about questions more specifically related to Brown and the Joukowsky Institute. And after each one of those sections, there will be time for a brief Q&A. And then at the end, any lingering questions we can also address. So yes, let's get into it.
Okay, let's start. So we have a first question for Felipe. Could you briefly explain the life course of a PhD in archaeology, including what students can expect with advising, exams, and the dissertation?
Yes, I'll try to be brief. So the initial part of the program, the first few years, is quite course heavy. You're expected to take a lot of coursework, and I should say from the very beginning of the program, you have an advisor who works closely with you to help you navigate not just the courses, but also the exams, and basically lead you into writing a dissertation. There are a series of exams again in the second and third years that are there both to basically confirm that you have a broad set of knowledge, but also to lead you to be able to write a dissertation. I should say that the person normally we identify a faculty member that for various reasons aligns with your work, but you're not bound to work with that person forever. It could happen that as you progress in the program, you, for whatever reason, realize that some other faculty member or another region than the one you expected to work in is more interesting to you, and so it's kind of a negotiation, but there will always be people guiding you in that process, and as you progress after the third year, let's say, you move away from coursework and start doing your own research after you've taken a series of exams. At that point, you have to define a dissertation committee, and so it's more than one person that works with you very closely in crafting a thesis, and then you have several years to write the thesis. About throughout this 6-year or sometimes 7-year process, you are often expected to do fieldwork almost every year, and many of our students do fieldwork, different forms of fieldwork. Some work very closely with us, some do not. I actually don't know what Marta and Talia are doing, but both of them are affiliated with excavations that have nothing to do with the Joukowsky, and that is common among as many of our students work with in projects that are not Joukowsky projects, even though some of our students work with us. Yeah, I think that's more or less a summary.
Okay, so next question, and this is kind of in general, but what kind of careers are students prepared for after having done a PhD in archaeology or any sort of adjacent field? And this question is for Laurel.
Yeah, thank you. This is obviously a concern when you start any program, and the PhD in archaeology, believe it or not, fits you to do many things, not just to become an academic in the field of archaeology, although many of our students do go on to get professorships in archaeology. That isn't everyone's goal, and it is certainly not the only path that people take, and we definitely support students who are seeking other paths, and we ask all of our students, in fact, to be broadly enough trained that they can do multiple things. So we have students who've gone into museum professions. We have students who've ended up in government or in other NGOs. We have students who've ended up in the CRM world, so as professional contract archaeologists as well. And increasingly also in other places in academia. So within academic administration is something. And all of these paths are ones that there are even specific training mechanisms for that you can partake of while you're in the PhD program in archaeology. Now, this is really not unique to Brown. This is, I think, increasingly the way that PhD programs in the United States in particular are going, is recognizing that we are training our students broadly so that you could be professors, but you don't have to be a professor.
Great, thank you.
Thank you so much, Laurel. So Felipe sort of touched on this before. So how important it is for graduate students to do fieldwork? Maybe Andrew can tell something also about the opportunities for students to participate in faculty project, but also if a student can also participate in other forms of archaeological work, like, for example, museums.
Yeah, so I mean, I think fundamentally what's most important is that for our students here at Brown is certainly to get sort of hands-on experience. And so fieldwork is definitely one of those sort of modes of experience. And as Felipe alluded to, there's opportunities with Brown affiliated projects. Effectively, all of the faculty in the Joukowsky have active sort of field projects that students can participate in. But at the same time, students can also participate in programs not affiliated with Brown. It's very common. It's basically whatever is the best fit for the students that are here. But likewise, that experience can also take other forms, like laboratory training. We've just launched an integrated laboratory for archaeological sciences, and we've got students that are doing sort of active work there, especially right now around paleoethnobotany and ceramic petrography, but we're also expanding into other areas as well, including sample preparation for stable isotope analysis. And then museums are also really sort of important. As was alluded to, a number of our graduates have gone on to do museum work, and part of that is built on experiences that they gained while they were sort of here at Brown. We have a number of museums very close by. The Haffenreffer Museum for Anthropology is at Brown University. Just up the road is the Rhode Island School of Design, has a museum museum that includes ancient materials. But we're also very close to both Boston and New York, which have sort of world-class sort of museums. So the question that folks might be asking is, well, do I need to get all of that experience prior to applying? And the answer is not necessarily, although it can certainly help, because when you're applying to a PhD program, you really want to be people on the other side that are reading applications are looking at, is this somebody who's going to be able to launch into being able to do research? And so having field experience, laboratory experience, museum experience certainly helps, but we also recognize that folks coming from different places might not have prior had that sort of experience. And so thinking about how you can translate some of the other experiences you've had to show that you might be a kind of team player on a field project, for example, or that you've had parallel laboratory experience, maybe in a different discipline. All of those things are also reviewed really favorably when folks are applying to graduate school.
All right, great, thank you. So the next question is for Felipe, and this is for maybe people who are perhaps less familiar with the way PhD programs generally work in the United States. So what are the teaching requirements for PhD students? This is kind of general, but you can also talk specifically, and how does that look through your progression? And I know it differs between programs, but kind of what would you say is best to expect from that?
Yeah, so graduate students in our program have various opportunities to teach, and as they progress through the program, the manner of teaching varies. And so everybody is expected at some point to be a teaching assistant, which involves helping a professor in the mentoring of students and in the grading. And very often as part of those TA-ships, people teach sessions of a class. So I'm teaching a class on fakes and forgeries, and one of my TAs will teach a couple of sessions a semester. He's involved in all of the grading, in the sense that he has to interact with every student and assess their work. There are other opportunities to teach. We have proctorships where people, for example, this year are involved in, there's a small collection of ancient material at Joukowsky, and people are involved in helping with the outreach, in the sense of sharing that collection with students who are interested, or who with other parties, or in variously documenting that collection. Many of our students who work with us in the field often also act as instructors in the field. And so, for example, in my work in Petra, graduate students often serve as direct instructors to undergraduate students in a trench, and so they direct trenches. And so there's lots of opportunities to teach, and for certain people who towards the end of their graduate career, a few people will be able to teach their own courses, but it's just a full-blown course as faculty, basically, for their last year of their career at the Joukowsky. So there's many opportunities to teach. It's expected that you teach, and it basically depends on your interest and what is kind of available to teach. Yeah.
Thank you, Felipe. I have now a question for Laurel. How should students go about determining a program that would be a good fit for them and their goals?
My gosh, that's a huge question, right? And a very nerve-wracking one for those of you who are imagining going to graduate school, how to find the right program and then how to get into that program. I think it's really important that you think of it from two perspectives, and keeping really a balance of thinking about what you need in terms of research, what you need to know knowledge-wise, skills-wise, and how a program can support that. And then also where you're going to be happy as a person. Graduate school is really hard and it's quite long. And if you're not happy as a person, then you're not going to have the energy to make it through the rigors of a program. So how to figure out what you need as a researcher? Well, you know what you're interested in. You have developed those interests to this point in your life. How do you see them growing, and what program is going to support that? I will say at Brown, we do not accept our own undergrads into the PhD program at Brown. One of the things that we really want to see in a developing scholar is that they are getting a variety of inputs. And so we think, oh, you guys already learned from us the types of questions that we ask, and you could learn more here, but you're going to learn even more somewhere else. So thinking of it in terms of what you have already learned that has taught you who you are as a scholar? And then where are you going to learn the next things? Now, you undoubtedly have been reading people's scholarship as a student to this point. Whose work interests you? Think of where scholars you want to study with might be, and then see if the scholarly apparatus around them is that which would support you. Does it have the depth or the breadth, if that's what you're looking for you to continue to grow in the ways that you want? And then think about where that school is and what the program looks like. Again, an American program with its coursework and its length is really different. It builds a different type of life and a different type of cohort of students than a program in Europe does, for instance. And know yourself. Do you have a spouse who wants to live in a certain place or has certain needs as a job? These are really valid things to keep in mind as you consider the academic sides of programs, because again, you won't be successful if you're not a happy person.
Great. That's a great response. Thank you. So I know I said we were going to do Q&As after each section, but it might be helpful to talk about application questions now and then do kind of all the Q&As for that stuff afterwards. So we're going to move on to that briefly. And I know there's some questions in the Q&A and Sarah is getting to those and she'll respond to you. And if there's anything left at the end, we'll also answer those. So we're going to try and answer all your questions. But now to move on to the application specific ones. So this is for Andrew, a little bit more technical. What are the elements of like most PhD applications, the Joukowsky in particular, and how does faculty evaluate them? So like differences between personal statement, statement of purpose, things like that.
Yeah, so probably the most important piece of the application is that personal statement. It's when faculty are reading that, they're looking for a number of things. One is just overall sort of fit for the program, whether a student's interests actually align with what's being sort of taught, the research that's being done, faculty interests, whether the faculty will be good mentors for that student. Sometimes students are a great student, but they just don't align well with the program and probably are better fit for a different school. That statement, what's also really important is to demonstrate that you are ready to do sort of PhD level research, so that you know the kind of research questions that ask that are sort of relevant and current and important in the field, and that you demonstrate some kind of knowledge of sort of what is the current research that's being done and what's sort of out there. And so that's really sort of what's crucially important in that statement, as well as highlighting what prior experience you've done that will put you in a position to do the sort of research that you're proposing. And as I sort of mentioned earlier, that can be things as straightforward as prior archaeological field experience, but you can also highlight how some other sort of non-archaeologically related experience might actually be germane for what it is you're hoping to do. And then obviously the CV also is going to matter. So there's no real sort of set format for a CV when applying to Brown. So if you sort of look online, you can find good examples of what CVs should look like. And a really easy thing is just look at the CVs of the people at Brown and specifically at the Joukowsky and think about how they've modeled their CV and think about how you might model your own. Then there are things like your transcripts are relevant, but to be honest, they're not hugely weighted. They might be sort of, considered if there's any red flags, but that's not as hugely important. Letters of recommendation are sort of important as well. And so having sort of people who can really speak to you as a person and sort of some of your past experiences that are relevant are sort of very important. And again, it doesn't matter that it's, comes from people who are super well known to people in the program that you're applying to, but just that people who can really sort of speak to you. And writing samples can also be sort of important as well, because again, it gets back to that question of we're trying to determine if you're ready to do PhD sort of level research. And a significant part of that is writing. You write a lot when you're here, and we want to make sure that you're going to be sort of able to sort of sustain that sort of level of writing. So those are really sort of the key parts. Now, one of the things I should mention is that we don't require the GRE currently, so that's one thing that you don't have to worry about. But language readiness is important. It goes back to that idea that you're going to be writing a lot, speaking a lot, and so whether it's the TOEFL or the IELTS, but that you've score well on that. And if you take a look at Brown's graduate school website, the general graduate school website, they've got sort of numbers about what Brown sort of expects as a bar for incoming graduate students on those tests.
Thank you, Andrew. I have a more specific question for Felipe about the personal statement. So how specific does a personal statement need to be with respect to proposed projects and faculty of interest?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think let me answer in three parts. So it's proposed projects, faculty of interest, and also past experience. I think in terms of past experience, you should be specific, and you should be. I mean, I'm sure you're all honest, but honest in the sense of saying what you've done, saying it specifically. If you've been to the field a couple of years, and if you've worked in ceramic analysis, that concreteness is useful to know your level. In terms of proposed projects, we want specificity, but not narrowness. I mean, if you have a super duper defined project that is already completely shaped, what's the point of coming here? And so I think it's more a question of showing that you know debates or a specific debate in the field and you want to participate in that discussion, but also giving a sense of your intellectual breadth that you can, if you've only worked whatever on the island of Samos for 3 years, that you can think beyond Samos, or if you only worked on architectural reconstruction, that you can think beyond architectural reconstruction to have kind of bigger questions. As Andrew was saying, it's really key to identify faculty members at the Joukowsky with whose interest you align or you resonate with their research profile, and that's because you're going to work really closely with us. And so it's not enough to be a great student. You also need to kind of have common intellectual interest, and so I think that's really the key thing, that that you find a few interlocutors among the faculty with whom you can work intensely for 6 or 7 years.
Great. Thank you. So the next question we have is about the writing sample, and this one's for Laurel. So the question here is, what kind of writing samples are successful? What kind of things should you include? What kind of work should you do? Can you use something that you've already written? Do you have to write something new? A lot of questions about that.
Yeah, totally. And if I get through with that, I'll go back to the personal statement question, because that's always huge too. We all have our opinions there. But on the writing sample front, you're expected to give us something that you have already written. This is not supposed to be a fresh piece of writing. What we really want to see is that you can demonstrate that you have done writing that can point to your interest and your readiness, as Professor Scherer was saying. So a couple of requirements. Your writing sample does need to be in English. Again, we are looking at a program where you're going to be doing a ton of writing in English. So if you think of what you're trying to demonstrate to us, we want to see, we're going to have confidence that you are going to be able to do this when you show us that your writing in English is good. You want to pick something that's about the ancient world and as archaeological as possible, right? So a piece of writing that is excellent writing, but is on a topic that is unrelated to what you'll be doing here, doesn't have the same weight. It doesn't perform that role of showing us that you're really good at this and ready for this. So pick something as close to what you're going to be doing as possible. A course paper is an excellent thing. Generally, you're going to be more successful with a formal piece of writing. So something that was written for a course, for instance, or a publication, if you have one, although that's not usually the case for applicants. That's going to do a better job, again, of showing us that you have this piece than something else. That said, sometimes people have done really interesting public-facing work as well. And if you've written something substantive and archaeological that is public-facing and you are applying where that is a big part of your profile, then this can be something you can show us too, as demonstration that you've got this. But again, you're still going to have to take a lot of classes and write a dissertation. So it might be safer to pick something more academic on that side. I just wanted to weigh in. Both of my colleagues have already spoken about the personal statement. And as Professor Scherer said, that is really the biggest piece of this puzzle. And to hit that piece that Felipe mentioned as well, that Professor Ross mentioned about how specific your project is, think about it again in terms of what we are looking to see. how are we going to read your application and have you rise to the top? And remember, again, the structure of the program. So we need to see both that your interests are defined enough and backed up enough by previous experience, and that you're open enough to new experiences and to changing your mind. So as Professor Rojas said, if you're very, very narrow, if you're proposing a dissertation in your statement of purpose, why would you want to take 3 years of classes? We don't believe that. I so enjoy laughing with my students when they get to the stage of proposing dissertations and saying, oh, you remember what you wrote in your letter? Because usually there's some shift. You have taken 3 years of classes and worked in the field and your interests have developed. It's rare for it to be a total sea change. We wouldn't want that either. We want to help you develop your knowledge and interests within the areas of your current interests. But you can't know, and it doesn't sound convincing if you say you know what you're going to write a dissertation on at the point where you're applying.
Thank you so much, Laurel. So next question is for Andrew about languages. So does previous language training affect the success of the applicant, and how can students get language training at Brown? And we are thinking both modern and ancient languages.
Yeah, and so we currently have an expectation that our PhD students have two modern languages, one of which they have to demonstrate speaking competency and that they can sort of operate professionally and basically communicate in the country that they might be working in. And then also reading competency in a second modern language, as well as reading competency in one ancient language. And so certainly having language abilities can factor into the application process. In that if you have those language abilities already, it's one of the things that we realize that, you're not going to be needing to work on your languages while at the same time doing sort of other aspects of your training. But that said, we also recognize that not everybody has access to that prior language training, and we don't want that to sort of filter really promising candidates out. So these things get kind of sort of balanced about, where do the languages fit in versus other sort of prior sort of experience. And certainly if you've got mastery of ancient Greek, Latin, and all these other languages, but your cover letter's terrible, that's really the most important thing. And so it's a factor, but it's not the deciding factor. And then in terms of training, we are fortunate at Brown to have a lot of sort of opportunities for training in modern and sort of ancient languages. And so our students regularly do take courses in, whatever the relevant modern language is for them, whether it's modern Greek, if it's Arabic, if it's Italian. Those courses are available, but we're also fortunate that the Department of Classics also offers training in Latin, Greek, in Egyptology and Assyriology. There's training in a number of ancient languages there as well. And so there's a lot of ancient language training going on at Brown as well. So there's a lot of basically great opportunities to get both modern and ancient language training.
Thank you. So our next question is for Felipe, and this is going to be, what does the application look like for international students? How is it different? Talking about language, visa stuff, and everything that can make it maybe a little bit more complicated for people coming from abroad.
Yeah. So, in the selection process, your nationality doesn't matter at all. We'll just assess you as a scholar. Yeah, it's a young scholar. If you are accepted, then the graduate school has an office to help you through the bureaucratic and diplomatic process to get the right visa. That takes months, and this happens in close consultation with the grad school. And so, I guess in a nutshell, one should be patient and ready to do a lot of bureaucratic paperwork. And as far as I can remember, we have not had any problems. People have received their visas eventually, and then once you are here in Brown, if you're accepted to the program and you get your visa, then there are a number of sort of institutions and programs and groups that help you navigate life in a different country. There's a robust international community, and and Marta is an international student. I myself am not American, and so it's I think it's a welcoming community, and there's always some adjustment, but it's inevitable if you change countries. And I think.
Yeah,
great. Thank you.
I think I can add something on this since I have this experience as international student. Just think in advance about asking translation of your transcripts, because if your transcripts are not in English, it's gonna require a little bit of time. I have this experience because my transcripts were in Italian. So make sure to do this in advance, and also think in advance about if you have to take a TOEFL exam, do it as soon as possible. And yes, I think that's all. The application process is completely normal, also for international students.
Okay, yeah. So that's kind of all the questions we had planned for the kind of general and application questions. And we have a few things in the Q&A that I think might be relevant to this discussion. And one of them is about, let me find it here. Yeah, so one of them is about letters of recommendation. So you did touch on that a little bit, but this specific question, we were asking about, would you prefer, oops, sorry.
It moved.
I know, it did move. Oh no, I've lost it. So basically the question was about who should we be asking for letters of recommendation? Is this, people who supervise us in the field, professors? And this can also kind of maybe extend a little bit into that international question because, I've had the experience of asking for letters of rec from people whose first language is not English. And I guess how to go about that, how you guys evaluate that, and like what makes a good letter of recommendation, basically.
Laurel, do you want to?
Sure, I can take it.
Sorry.
I mean, Andrew already started on this a little bit. And again, think of it, what are we going for here? What do we need to see here? You want people who know you well. You do need some academic letters of recommendation. It doesn't need to be 100%, but the weight should be on the academic. So if, for instance, you're going to have 3 letters of recommendation, you want at least 2 of them to be people who know your academic work well, because you're applying to do a degree here. That said, that third one or an additional, a supplemental one from someone who knows you in another capacity, if they know you really well and in a way that's particularly relevant, if you have worked as a curatorial intern for a couple of summers with someone who can write with deep knowledge of what you've been doing, if you've got someone you've worked with in the field extensively, these are academic adjacent and very relevant, and we would love to read these letters. The issue of international letters is interesting too, because letters of recommendation are very culturally specific to the person who's writing them. And we are reading from the perspective of an American program. American letters of recommendation tend to be quite long and quite detailed, and not simply to state that you've achieved qualifications, but really to speak with depth about particular work you've done and about you as a person, as well as the work you've done. So speak to your recommenders and see if they understand how to write that kind of letter. Many people who work outside of the American system do know how to write for an American audience, but really make sure that you're speaking to people that can write in this way, as well as getting a range of people. It's a good question.
Okay, great.
My colleagues want to add things.
I don't know. So we have about 25 minutes left, so maybe we could make sure we get through all of the final part of the webinar, and then we can really go back into the questions later. Because I know.
Sorry, could I answer one of the questions? There's somebody who asked, can you be a competitive PhD applicant without a master's degree?
That's a good one.
What should you be on your resume? What should be on your resume if you're applying to a PhD straight out of undergrad? And it's a very good question, because I think that there have been cases, very rare cases, in which we've accepted students without an MA, but it's very, very rare. We expect people to have fieldwork experience. We expect people to have been exposed enough to so that they know that they want to be doing this professionally, or at least for a long time. So I think it's a good question, and I don't know whether either of my colleagues would like to add something to that, but it's really rare that we're taking people without MAs.
Yeah, I mean, I think it happens, but it's oftentimes the folks who have a prior master's degree just have earlier experience, and so it's possible, but it's the kind of thing that you might want to reach out with your CV and see if you think that you'd be competitive or not in the application process.
On the other hand, there's no harm in applying. We definitely have people who have applied year after year and who have ended up getting in after doing a master's degree elsewhere, having not gotten in, having applied with just a bachelor's degree. So that certainly doesn't hurt your chances later on. And as when you applied to do your bachelor's degree, the idea of applying for your dream shot and something safe, which might be another a master's program instead, is still good advice.
Great. So yeah. Okay, so now maybe we can just move on really quickly just to make sure that we get the questions about like the Joukowsky specific questions, and then we'll totally go back to the Q&A if that sounds all right for everyone. So just the first question for specifically the Joukowsky is for Andrew. And this one, so we have archaeologists in a lot of different departments, a lot of different fields at Brown. What sets the Joukowsky apart, and what would you say are the main strengths of the Institute in terms of like research themes and regions of work?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the defining sort of features of the PhD program at the Joukowsky is it's intended to train folks in sort of Mediterranean archaeology, that the requirements are explicitly around, you will eventually have your geographic focus area, but especially early on in the program, you're getting this sort of training more broadly in sort of Mediterranean archaeology. And the idea there is it's especially to sort of, well, one of the ideas at least is that it helps sort of pivot folks for academic jobs if that's where they're going, that they have that sort of broad-based training. And so that's one thing that's really defining, and that part of how that plays out is the idea that even though students will have advisors, they also will be working with many of us in the Institute. It's not just one student works with one person and that's it, and they don't work with other folks. There's really is an expectation that they're tapping into all of the great sort of resources here at the Institute, both the faculty and the postdocs that come through and things like that. And so that's what's really sort of characteristic of sort of Joukowsky Institute. At the same time, it's the Joukowsky Institute is embedded at Brown, which is notoriously interdisciplinary and with very low walls between sort of programs. And so it's very easy to connect up to other programs on campus. Most obviously are some of the allied units. So the places that Joukowsky faculty have their tenure homes, because every Joukowsky faculty has a tenure home in a department at Brown. And so the main ones are Egyptology and Assyriology, classics, anthropology, history of art and architecture is also important, religious studies, but then also students can take advantage of even further programs here at Brown sort of connect with. So I think that in a lot of ways kind of defines the sort of the Institute's that sort of core training in Mediterranean archaeology, but at the same time being able to connect to those different programs. And on that sort of spirit of interdisciplinariness is you also get a sort of a real blend of folks that might lean more heavily into the humanities, might lean more heavily to social sciences or natural sciences, or even embrace all of those things. And certainly, we're tend to be most focused on sort of humanistic approaches to the past, but at the same time being able to tap into a number of different sort of theoretical approaches, methodological approaches, different sort of frameworks for thinking about sort of the archaeology of the Mediterranean particularly.
Okay, thank you so much. And related to this, I have a question for Felipe. Is interdisciplinary work encouraged? In what ways can students access resources outside the Joukowsky and also outside Brown?
Yeah, it's more than encouraged. It's kind of expected that all students be cross-disciplinary. And as Andrew said, there are no real walls. Brown is in some ways a small university compared to, say, public universities in America or in Europe. It's kind of a small university, so you are expected to do things in many departments and to work with different sorts of people. I think that Andrew also said it succinctly, that even though we lean heavily towards the humanities, it's easy to work with people doing environmental science or anyway, other more science-driven approaches to the past. Within Brown, there are lots of opportunities to do this research or to even fund this research, and I'm sure that the entire faculty of the Joukowsky Institute would be really encouraging if you are interested in seeking funding or collaboration across disciplines beyond Brown. There are structures within our institute to help you write grants or help you find the sources of funding that could lead to longer term collaborations across disciplines.
Okay, great. Thank you. So the next question is a little bit longer, and this one's for Laurel. So archaeologists are now contending with the legacy of past practices that were often colonial, unethical, and exclusionary to those in underrepresented or marginalized groups. What kind of work is the Joukowsky doing to address this both internally and across the discipline? And in what ways can graduate students expect to partake in it?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and it's really woven into nearly everything we do now. And I think it's important to consider it from two perspectives. One is how, as Americans in the complex environment of America, are we addressing, and will we continue to address ongoing inequities in our own society in a difficult time? And then the other is that we are, most of us, engaged in fieldwork in places that are themselves in post-colonial environments. And really, again, this is woven into everything we do. It's also not something we have the answers for. This is necessarily a work in progress, and it's something that we perform rather than arrive at an answer with. So just to point to some of the things that we do, speaker series and conferences are often directly targeted to address issues of underrepresentation within the American context. That is something that we've been really supportive of, and graduate students have been deeply involved in the past years. The more recent State of the Field, not super recent, a couple years ago now, State of the Field conference, for instance, on social justice was an example of this. Looking at what this looks like in the field, the language requirements that we've just spoken about are directly targeted to address this, rather than simply talking about research languages in the kind of you need to have French and German way that is characteristic of many programs. We've instituted a requirement that you become conversational in the place where you are working. All of us who have long-term field projects really engage with local communities in ways that value the expertise and knowledge and continuing presence of the people in the places we work. And while this is a little bit harder to engage with as a graduate student, you're necessarily only here for a short amount of time in comparison to, say, the relationship between a project and its local community. There's lots of room for thinking about this and developing your relationships with people, for sure. And it's even something you can think about in terms of your application. So I work in the modern Middle East. It's very important to me, not just the language, but that my students be cognizant of and really aware of and care about the culture of the place that they work now. I like my students to take a class in Islam, for instance. I like to see that applicants have engaged with modern local communities in the place where they propose to do work. So this is going to be different based on what experiences and opportunities you have had, but we want you to be thinking creatively and to show that this is something that you value, and think about how you might continue to develop that as a graduate student, because again, in myriad ways, it is really central to our practice as archaeologists now.
Great, thank you.
Thank you so much, Laurel. So next question is for Andrew, and I think it's an important one. In what ways are students financially supported? If you can tell us something about stipend, health insurance, and also fundings both from the grad school and the Joukowsky.
Yeah, so all graduate students at the Joukowsky Institute are fully funded, and they're funded sort of equally. And one of the great things about that then is it sort of helps sort of foster that spirit of collegiality, that basically everybody's kind of on equal footing. There's no competition for funding or things like that in terms of especially the stipend. And Brown's stipend is extremely generous. It's one of the most generous in the country, and arguably the most generous if you scale up to the cost of living, because Providence relative to, say, New York City or Boston or something like that is much more affordable. And so next year, that stipend is going to be $52,198. That's publicly available. You can just do a Google and look for Brown graduate stipend. So it's a very generous stipend that's paid sort of over a 12-month cycle. And in addition to that, there's full health insurance. That includes dental and vision. And then there's also additional funding that's available both within the Institute and at Brown University in general to cover things like conference travel, research travel, field equipment, kind of sort of you name it. And so there's overall, there's a sense that Brown students are fairly sort of well supported, both in terms of the stipend, but then also additional sort of research opportunities. And it's one of the nice things about being an institute itself is that, we're able to sort of address very particular needs that students might have in terms of sort of research support if they might be falling short in one area or the other.
Great. Yeah, and did you want to talk about the union, Marta, or do you want me to?
Yeah, I mean, go on this, but yeah, I will not spend much time on this. Like, just to let you know that grad students here at Brown are unionized, and I think they're doing a great job also in terms of stipend. But yeah, if you want to reach out to have more information, I think we can give you much more details.
Yeah. And then the last question we prepared was the culture within the graduate cohort and how program structures kind of contribute to that community. And I will just say that I know neither of us have been here very long, but I find that it's kind of Andrew touched on this a little bit with talking about this kind of even financing, even stipend. It's really a supportive community. I think that's a huge plus here in my experience. It's been great to work with people. There's not a feeling of competition, I think, which is really, really important when we're kind of all doing this really big task of doing a PhD together.
Yeah, I also want to ask something about the facilities. The Institute, the Joukowsky, has been recently renovated. It's a very comfortable place for spending so many hours studying. We have a grad student studio. Each of us have a desk. We have a kitchen. So we spend a lot of time together in the institute. But and I think, we are building a really nice community around the Joukowsky.
Okay, and so we actually do have a fair amount of time left to talk about these questions in the Q&A. So let's see what might jump out here. So we did have one question about the organization of kind of the other departments that we're affiliated with. So how are the departments organized at Brown? It seems like art history, ancient history, Egyptology, Assyriology are kind of separate. How does that work?
Yeah, so Brown one of the things that's kind of distinctive about the PhD program at the Joukowsky is it's a PhD program that's embedded inside of an institute, and an institute is a different entity than a sort of a department. And so that has kind of sort of interesting sort of implications. And so the key thing is as an institute, in some sense, with degree programs, it does function like a department, but at the same time, it also does things that institutes are meant to do, which is bring together students and scholars from other departments around sort of research and other sort of activities. Whereas all of those other departments operate more like what you might think of as a sort of a traditional sort of academic department, where they're especially sort of organized around sort of teaching, training, and sort of that sort of thing, and taking then advantage of sort of other sort of resources at Brown. So that's a sort of a constant kind of source of confusion, is this sort of sense that it's a degree program, but it's a degree program embedded within an institute, which is different than a degree program embedded sort of within a department. But again, the key thing is that because all of the faculty have those tenure homes in those departments, we keep really strong sort of ties with those programs. And there's even students in those places that are doing very similar things. And so there are also archaeologists that are pursuing degrees in anthropology. There are, of course, Egyptologists, both at the Joukowsky, but also in Egyptology and Assyriology. And so there's a lot of sort of fluidity across the departments and the institutes.
Andrew, I'll just pick up on that a little bit, because one of the questions I get very frequently is, should I apply to the Joukowsky Institute or to Egyptology if I want to do a PhD in Egyptian material culture with you, Professor Bestock? And I am faculty in both places. And as Andrew has said, that's really, they have differences and yet a lot of overlap as well. And many of you may be in the position of wanting to know which part of Brown to apply to if you want to work with a faculty member in the Joukowsky Institute. And what I always encourage students to do is sort of take a look at the program structures, particularly the exam structures, and see which set of exams are going to better suit your needs in terms of where you see your research going and filling the holes that you have. It's perfectly possible, if you want to do Egyptian material culture, to take literally the exact same classes, whether you're a PhD student in Egyptology or a PhD student in the Joukowsky. You're going to get both ancient Egyptian language and Egyptian material culture and material culture of other places in your coursework. What do you want your exams to look like? What do you want your dissertation committee to look like? What types of jobs are you thinking of applying to when you're done? That would help you decide. And I can't make that decision for you. I take students in both places.
And on that particular point, a really great resource to study are the graduate student handbooks in the respective programs. That's really how you can get at the sort of what's under the hood about what you'll be doing in any of the respective degree programs at Brown.
Great.
Yeah.
So, oh, sorry.
No, good.
No, you go ahead. I asked the last one.
Yeah, I mean, I just see an interesting question about how many students are typically accepted and how many apply.
So it varies by year, because we have rolling numbers that the graduate school is looking for, in the sense of that there's a total, like, how big is the program ideally? And so if we sort of have a lower enrollment one year, it might be bigger in another year. So it's really sort of variable. And so it can range between, I'm trying to think off the top of my head, as low as like around 3 admits to as high as, I'm trying to remember what some of our highest admits were.
Well, the highest are around 80.
No, in terms of the number that we can admit.
We've never been able to take more than 5 people, and I think we got screened at for taking 5 people.
Yeah. And then, like Felipe was saying, number of applicants is, what did you say was highest, was around 80 one year?
Yeah, 60 or 60 to 80 or something like that.
Yeah. So it is very competitive.
Could I read a question and then answer it?
Sure.
Somebody asked, finding academic interlocutors, how would you professors like to be reached out by a potential student? How does one network? So what I mean by knowing who your possible academic interlocutors is read what we write and see whether what we write resonates with your interests. It's not so much about contacting us personally, it's rather knowing our intellectual kind of profile, our interest, our publications, our excavations. And I think that's what I mean by kind of trying to begin to determine who the people at the Joukowsky that you want to work with are.
Yeah, on that particular point, it's crucial to move past just descriptions of faculty that we all have on our website. And really, if you want to have a strong introduction, if you're reaching out to faculty, have some knowledge of their particular research, like have a look at their articles and be kind of aware of what folks are kind of currently working on, as opposed to just reading the quick blurb that, oh, Professor Scherer does Maya, warfare, bioarchaeology, that kind of stuff. Dig a little bit deeper and see what kind of I've said about those things.
But it's totally unnecessary to be personally in contact with us before the application cycle, really and truly. If you have a real question to ask us, then don't hesitate to do so. That's fine, but you don't need to be on our radar in that way before the application cycle.
Okay, and then one question, we have another question about languages, and we did kind of address this a little bit, but seeing as the requirements have changed, this question was about how to demonstrate competence in languages. And one other person asked about, they were a French student who did a master's at Columbia or in the United States. Do they still need to pass an English exam? So how are we kind of evaluating people's language skills? Because that can definitely take up a considerable amount of time in PhD programs.
I think that question depends on what the person wants to do. I think there's some requirements are Brown requirements. It's not the department's requirement. So the TOEFL, for example, is we're not asking for the TOEFL. That's the grad school is asking for the TOEFL, and that's unavoidable. You just have to take it if you're an international student. I think, for example, Talia has an MA from France, and she demonstrated competence in French by saying, I have an MA from France. And so we basically took as sufficient competence the fact that she wrote an MA in French.
And we do, I think some of the language requirements can be fulfilled not by test, but through taking courses. So I know the modern language requirement, if you take, it's still a significant amount of courses, but kind of standard undergraduate level language courses to reach speaking competency.
And for folks who might be applying internationally, if you just Google Brown TOEFL graduate school, you'll get both the scores for the TOEFL and the IELTS in terms of what's the bar, and that's really what is relevant, is that general grad student bar.
All right. Do you have a question, Marta, you wanted to?
There's a question.
Sorry, there's a question that I think is important, which is, are there resources for PhD students to find childcare? One of my colleagues with children could answer that.
There, sort of the question around support for graduate students with childcare is kind of one of the current things that's actually being sort of worked on with the union and the graduate school. So there's, to my knowledge, nothing in particular available right now, but that's a current sort of point of discussion.
I will say that sorry. I do believe there is paid maternity leave within the financial support. And I know in the Joukowsky, there are students who have taken advantage of that, who have had kids over the time that they've been here. So that is also a huge, I think, plus, and that's very important in terms of support.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah, that's absolutely the case.
We have a couple questions about CRM, perhaps maybe to close out. So one person asked, would a master's in CRM or a certificate in GIS be helpful for an applicant, or would it be better to have a traditional master's in archaeology? And then someone else said, does a CRM background from North America aid, hamper, or make little difference for someone wanting to study in the Eastern Mediterranean?
I mean, I think as a skill, it's helpful. If you've had a lot of field experience in CRM, or if you're really good at GIS, those are skills that are useful for any archaeologist. And so it does not hurt to have that. On the other hand, it is an academic program. And so when Laurel in particular was talking about the importance of a master's, I think she meant an academic master's just because that's the program. But again, to emphasize, lots of experience digging and lots of competence in GIS, good.
We care about methodological rigor, including in the field.
Great. All right. And then it looks like Sarah Sharp just sent a message to the chat. If anyone else has any questions, there's a lot of answers to those on the FAQ at Brown. Questions also about the medical. The medical insurance is also on the Brown website for anyone who's curious about that. And yes, there's an email that she just sent as well for further questions. I know we couldn't get to all of them, and I apologize for that. But yeah, thank you guys so much for being here today.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you to the faculty.
Thank you, too.
We look forward to your applications.
Yes. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.